Welcome to another episode of Marketing Jam. Thank you so much for joining us here. Huge thank you to Canada Post for making the show possible. And I am thrilled to introduce you to Geoffrey, who comes from the wild and amazing world of Microsoft. And if you didn't know, all of these shows are actually recorded on Skype that you've been watching recently, especially during COVID. We've been relying on Skype to make it possible for the show to happen. And the beloved Microsoft is the fine folks behind Skype. And if you didn't know, they're also the people behind Xbox. So if you're an Xbox fan, that is them. And of course, Bing, especially those that are in the B2B market or marketing to seniors or marketing to folks that are typically on computers that are PC. It came with Internet Explorer and they Bing. You'll probably see lots of Bing in your Google Analytics results, amongst many things that Microsoft's involved with. So Geoffrey, thank you for coming on the show. We're really excited to have you here.
Hey, thanks, Darian. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So tell me about your role specifically in the wild, again, kind of a mass world of Microsoft, because you're not just Microsoft Excel and Microsoft Word, PowerPoint. Like Microsoft is everywhere. So tell me about your kind of world that you live in and operate in.
Yeah, so I live in the advertising world, which can mean a lot of things in this day and age. I think it's interesting because we don't like to use that term advertising, but what else do you really call amplifying or influencing or persuading others? I mean, we could come up with a lot of different names, but I think advertising is really stuck just based on history. And what that really means is, we develop a number of solutions, advertising solutions in search, in native, in display, that we sell and offer to partners of all shapes and sizes, from small businesses to large Fortune 100 companies, so that they can grow their brand and grow their business. So that's basically the world that I have lived in at Microsoft the last 7 years since I've been at the company and come from the agency world. Worked at Ogilvy for a while, worked at 360i for a while. Worked in the tech startup world in New York for a while. So, I really enjoy this world. I enjoy sort of the ways that it has evolved and continues to change and continues to borrow from the past in order to, figure out where it wants to go in the future.
And when you talk about advertising, it's anywhere from the Bing platform to all, and tell me maybe kind of all the platforms that you guys currently own, because I don't think many people are aware of all of them.
Yeah, so Bing obviously is the big one in terms of the search engine that we have and the search advertising that you can buy on it. There's also a number of Microsoft properties I think people forget about. Microsoft Network or Microsoft News, which actually is an app that you can have on iOS or Android that a lot of people utilize. There's a number of advertising solutions there. So if you're thumbing through that for let's say business news or other news that you might follow, there's native advertising that is actually you can purchase on those properties that uses a number of different signals in terms of your search history, as well as the things that you might be interested in. I think that's sort of native's been powerful in those areas. And then there's a lot of areas that we are continuing to test. If we think about Mixer, which is Twitch's what would you say, competition in terms of like a live video streaming network that a lot of gamers use, but has also picked up a lot of speed with people who are in the DJ community, the food community, makers, let's call them. What's the advertising solutions going to look like, there? So I think, those are the areas that, we've been involved in for, many years in terms of our offerings, but search is pretty much like I think the bread and butter of what makes up Microsoft advertising.
I was at your headquarters this last year, and one of the coolest things I forgot and didn't realize, you guys also are the ones, you own Minecraft now, which is amazing. Yep. So anyone with a who has a hobby of Minecrafting or has a child that is into Minecrafting, you're well aware of that world. And you guys are behind LinkedIn. That's your baby as well.
Yeah, it operates separately from us. I think that's the interesting thing too. And people say, hey, do you have, does your work involve with LinkedIn? Yes, in the sense that I work with a lot of people at LinkedIn Marketing Solutions in terms of thought leadership and advertising solutions, but they have their own team, they have their own marketing, they have their own language that they use, they have their own brand team. They have the B2B Institute, which helps, I think, a lot of companies understand how to better market on LinkedIn if you're a B2B brand, which is, predominant there. So yeah, that's a lot of fun. I mean, I have just a lot of friends over there who I learn from a lot in terms of what their advertising solutions are. And yeah, it's great. I think that it does operate separately in the sense that when it was acquired, I think, Satya Nadella, our CEO, has been good about letting a lot of acquisitions just operate independently from the mothership. That way they just, they don't feel like they just, have to basically follow all the rules of sort of the big corporation, and they can sort of just go off and experiment and continue to do interesting things.
Well, when it comes to brands who are advertising right now, what are some of the trends that you're seeing? What are the things that you're really excited about coming down the pipe, and just things that people should be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, I think one that's been, really out there for a long time, and I've been researching it and, wrote about it in my book that came out in 2016 is, brand purpose or brands and, ethics in marketing, or what we would call marketing with purpose. That's an interesting area. There's a number of brand analysts that sort of write that off quickly. They're very quick to say, nobody purchases based on that. They don't really have, there's almost like this rational economist view that, well, people don't have a moral compass. If they need something, they just go purchase that solution. They don't really worry about what the company is that they're, buying from. I'd say with low cost things, that might be the case. I think with higher cost products and services, you are going to probably ask a lot of those questions. You may wonder what a company is doing with a lot of its revenue. You also may ask a lot of questions on how does the company treat its employees? What are the other statements that it's making? That, I think, is coming into, more light of day because of the world that we live in, currently. And I don't think this is anything that's going to go away overnight. I think this is basically the path that we're set up on in terms of people questioning more and more, hey, what do companies do? What does their board or their corporate leadership team look like? These are questions that, aren't new. They've been around for a long period of time. I just think a lot of people on the fringe side of branding were quick to note, eons ago, wow, a lot of these brands talk a big purpose game, but they don't really behave that way when they're out there creating their products, or how they treat their employees, or how they do other things. And a lot of this has come to light not just because of Black Lives Matter, but also in addition to COVID-19. If you think about it, what was the number one question a lot of people were asking of brands? Hey, you laid a lot of your employees off, or you furloughed a lot of them, and yet at the same time you've paid a lot of your higher executives a lot of money. That got a lot of people to sort of question the purpose around some of these brands. So I think managing a brand in this day and age in 2020 is probably the hardest thing to do, because it's not about just the 4 Ps anymore, which are important, but it's also about, that sort of 5th P, which is, hey, what is that purpose of a brand? What is its mission of why it's here? And again, we don't have to, brands don't have to all say like, hey, we're here to solve every world issue. Some brands might just say, this is what we basically, this is what we provide. But if they do that by saying like, but hey, we also feel like equality and sustainability is important and we're practicing that, I think they get ahead in this day and age. And again, not anything new. I point back to a lot of brands from, 25 years ago, 30 years ago. Ben and Jerry's really started a lot of social justice work. So if anybody's like, hey, this is something that's new that brands, should stay away from, I would beg to differ that a lot of brands really have gotten, involved in this based on their, pedigree eons ago.
And you look at Ben and Jerry's, who's an example of a B corporation. So are you
Yeah.
finding that the
Yeah.
B Corp movement is becoming even more important today?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great, I mean, Darian, you bring up a good example. I mean, they don't want to just be, incorporated or an LLC. They really want
Yeah.
to, I think, go further. I've heard discussions even from some big entrepreneurs, Richard Branson being one of them, that, he actually has talked a lot about how, maybe some companies, less of them go public because then they have the ability to actually become, B Corps or do other
Yeah.
things with their revenue that they can't do if
Yeah.
they're actually publicly listed. Mark
Yeah.
Cuban has brought this up. There's a
Yeah.
number of people, I think, who are going to continue to discuss this, which reshapes business models. And again, I think
Yes.
this is something that, it's not for every brand, but some brands
Yeah.
are going to maybe question and say this might be the right path for us based on what what their product or what their solution happens to be.
I like that B Corp allows companies maybe who aren't like a 10 tree, who for every shirt bought they give, they plant a tree, or Tom Shoes, every shoe bought they give away a pair of shoes.
Yep.
They do it more blatantly and obtusely. But B Corps can be, I'm a plumbing outfit but I just run things, at our core in a good way.
Yeah, I think it does a number of things too. It gets people who actually are excited to want to go work for some of those companies.
Yeah.
If you think about how people have, how they've approached work the past 20 years,
Yeah.
that's really changed a lot. There are a number of people who say they want to go work for companies or institutions that they feel are doing interesting things for the world. So I think some of these models are really, interesting. You bring up, Tom Shoes, Warby Parker basically is another one that provides, we're also seeing a lot of companies that might say, hey, we take 20% of our revenue and here's all the companies that or I shouldn't say companies, here's all the non-government organizations or nonprofits we donate to. Real transparency there in terms of, hey, this is where we're going to give our money to. Some investors might say, I don't know about that. That's not the right path for me. But now there's this huge social impact investing movement that, I think is picking up speed, where it's okay to say, hey, maybe I'm not making as much return on investment in terms of dollar or revenue, but I'm making that based on societal impact. What is important? Maybe it's okay to not make as much money on investing as we thought in the past, but actually maybe provide some good sustainability for future generations.
Yeah. So let's just say plumbing company X goes ahead and becomes a B Corp and gets a thing, or just they live out the values of B Corp and they don't want to pay the B Corp fee, so they live it out. How can they communicate that, or how can they get that out in advertising?
I think a lot of it is based on what they do on their website in terms of their transparency. If you think about how a company's public, they have to basically note or be very open about, hey, here's what our company is doing, because shareholders need to know that, the public needs to know that. I think it's the same thing here. If you're very transparent about the fact that, hey, we're a B Corp, here's what we do with our, a percentage of our revenue, here's what we're going to continue to be open about in terms of what's important to us. You may lose some customers from this. Let's be honest, Darian. There are a number of people who've told me, oh, I would never support that company. I don't really like what they're doing. But I think the reason a lot of companies go that direction is they gain from it. They're not worried about how they lose from it. They actually are like, hey, we're going to take a stand on this particular issue, and that's what we're going to do. And we're okay if we lose a few customers. We may gain some more customers, more diehard customers as a result of that. So that's another thing in branding that, when I've studied the past, 6 to 7 years, it's been interesting because, in my conversations, I've basically been saying, since I wrote the book, Disruptive Marketing, hey, some companies might actually have to be political And a lot of brand managers were like, no, that's not possible, Jeff. They shouldn't be that. They should be apolitical. And of course, I said, no, I hear you. You want to basically be open to every single person possible. And there are definitely some companies you don't have to be political, let's say. But in other areas, it's hard to remain apolitical if people see sort of the world falling around down around them, and a company is just like, we're not going to basically say anything about this, and we're just going to go about our business and do this. That's where you lose a lot of people who might say, question, look, we're not looking you to be the solution, but we're actually looking for you to provide some value here on this in terms of, what are your internal policies? What are you doing for employees? What are you doing for customers? How are you keeping people safe during a global pandemic? I mean, there's a lot of questions that have really come out in just this short year alone that I think has boggled a lot of people who've been really hired to nurture a brand, not have much change, and not deal with any disruption.
I feel like at this time, no one really has a choice anymore. It's like the mirrors have all been put up. Social media, the court of public opinion is not an easy court to be headed to, and the judges are judging every day and poking and prodding.
Yeah. I think we could use the phrase, we all live in public now. So it's, there's no clothes that anybody can wear. Everybody can see a little bit more inside what companies are doing. There are more employees or ex-employees who are open about their situations. There are a lot more customers that are more vocal about how they might have been, how they've dealt with a company or a brand. And it's interesting because in all that time, the last 10 years, we have really defunded brand marketing. We have really put almost all of the, we've really, basically given all the money in marketing to performance. What can we get on short term, and basically what can we show for that? And I think it's caught a lot of brands off guard now who are like, we don't even have a brand like marketing team. What do we do here? And so I'm actually now starting to see in some of the studies I've done an increase on platforms like Indeed and LinkedIn for brand marketing managers, brand directors that have not existed. I think the uptick, on my last study is like, I don't know, something like 65% more titles year over year than existed before. Now, that could be for other reasons like, we need just to have a brand director. I think, honestly, it's companies that realize we need someone to basically overlook what our long-term strategy is going to be. Because we can't just rely on performance marketing. It's got to be a 50-50 on both of those.
Yeah, that's great. Where do you go for all these like ideas and information and inspiration? Where are your kind of go-to resources for to keep you fulfilled and inspired and going each day?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a lot of interesting people I've been able to meet virtually or physically over the years. I mean, there's a lot of great people that I met through, working in the agency world that I, just sort of started to follow on, Twitter or listen to them basically keynoting if they went out to like a big event. And I really just got interested in a lot of those folks. And a lot of them are in areas that I don't necessarily dabble in. Like one of my favorite people actually to follow is this woman who is really big in like the e-gaming culture. I wouldn't call myself a gamer at all, but I'm just fascinated by that world because there's a whole, like brands are doing things there that I think they've been doing them for a while if we look at some examples, but like there's so many interesting cultural tidbits that come from gaming. So I was like, all right, let me follow someone who knows that world. Like, how are brands navigating that? Then she talks about like how music is broken there, other like fashion is broken there, other forms of culture are broken there. Brands really.
Marshmello did a concert in a Fortnite game.
There you go.
It was amazing. Like my 13-year-old plays it, and then another thing I found fascinating was trying to advertise to like that 8 to 13-year-old market. It's very hard on any channel. but they had a game within Fortnite where if you could discover Thanos' glove and put it on, you became like the overpowered person. And you had to chase him. It was like capture the flag, and you get the glove, and who can hold the glove the longest. But it was an incredible advertisement for the new Avengers movie that was coming out that month.
Yes. And it was interactive. That's the other thing about gaming is no one is going to say, okay, hey, let's do this activation there.
Yeah.
And it's going to, and then say, hey, let's have it look like advertising. No, they're like, hey, let's have it play into the native nature of these games.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I think that's sort of fascinating, and it's an area that I want to, you know, continue to watch. There's a woman who I worked with at Ogilvy. Her name's Cheryl Barbie. We talk all the time. We always had really interesting conversations on brand strategy. I follow her and I talk to her quite a bit, mainly because she works at FCB, which is the big agency. She's based in Chicago, but she's basically shown me, because I've always been into live streaming and live video, but she's now showing me like, hey, Jeff, that world is now meeting the commerce world, and it's blowing up into this thing that in China and South Korea, it's a big deal. It's like I think she said something like it's a $4 billion a year industry of like where people like to do live stream shopping. And she's like, here, it's starting to really take root. And so I'm just fascinated by some of these new areas that probably aren't on a lot of people's radar, but that's really where I'd like to, you know, play in just to see, okay, will that blow up or will that just sort of fizzle out? You know, other areas I think I'm fascinated in are following people who are, you know, work in mixed reality, following people who work in voice in terms of, you know, voice skills. And 2 years ago, I, you know, started to program my own voice skills because I just got really fascinated with, you know, would that lead to something interesting, or is that just a flash in the pan? Again, we don't really know because we don't know what adoption will be. Plus, at the time when a lot of people said, well, voice will never take off, we didn't have a pandemic where people are less likely wanting to touch things now. So voice could maybe become interesting, or it could just fizzle out and be something that is just another user interface that we only want to use in certain circumstances.
Or my daughter, who's 5, knows how to tell Alexa to turn on certain songs that she loves. To the point where we've turned off Alexa in our kitchen because it just became too much hearing hand clap over and over and over again. Which is a great song, but all the time, you don't want to hear it all the time. Hey, interesting fact for you, Jeff, speaking of live streaming. A block from our office here in Fort Langley, British Columbia, is the world's most popular live stream of kittens. So tinykittens.com, their headquarters is down the road, and it is a live stream very popular in Japan where you can watch kittens just playing on each other. And so people will watch it for hours, and they will actually get shipped gifts and thank yous and pet food and cat food from all over the world to just thank the stream for doing what it's doing.
I love it. I mean, it's crazy because that person are the people who probably were behind that at the time. When they started it, it was probably just like, hey, let's just stream this. Like, let's see, you know, and it probably had no viewers, and then something tips and it becomes massively popular with culture. I just think it's fascinating what we can do with, you know, in both when the real world meets, you know, sort of the internet world or virtual world. It can be exciting still. Yeah.
Like when Ninja and Drake played Fortnite together, live stream, like that was, it was huge.
I mean, there were more people that, like, I think they said something, there was some crazy stat I read that more people viewed that, so observed that, watched that, than some, like, sporting events. So it's already showing you that, like, that is not it's not something that's fringe. That's mainstream now, and I think we should pay attention more to these things. Yeah. Fascinating.
I remember the date that, and it was the YouTube star. It was early YouTube days, and her name was Lonely Girl, and she got outed as it being a fake thing because people realized that all of her furniture was from IKEA. She was an actress, but she came across as this like homeschool girl who posted a video every day. But she was the first YouTuber that had as many weekly views as the average TV show at the time. And so
Yeah.
it just broke the fact that like YouTube can and will be as popular as a TV show. And she was, again, you thought she was creating content just on her own, but of course we ended up finding out it's produced. But it was incredible to see that this YouTuber just cracked that TV
Yeah.
ceiling.
I love it. I think we'll continue to see more of that. Maybe not on YouTube, but I think on some other platforms as they evolve and change. I mean, there's always been discussions on, does TikTok add longer links so that, I mean, we've seen this. We get people that get hooked based on a particular type of, meme or culture that happens, and then it pivots elsewhere to be more inclusive to other cultures. I mean, that's why I would say, Twitch and Mixer aren't just for gaming anymore. If you actually log on to Twitch, you can pretty much watch any type of video. It's just that it happens to be live streamed. I mean, I think
a new show.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's my good friend Lance, actually, who was helped get this show on Amazon Prime. He runs a very popular news show. It's probably one of the most popular Twitch channels in Canada, where he gives the news, but does it over Twitch. Yeah.
And I think we'll see more of that because people will just be like, hey, this is the technology is getting cheaper, the barrier to entry is cheaper. You can get a microphone, you can get a streaming video camera. These things aren't as expensive as they were at one time. I mean, your Wi-Fi connection is probably the most expensive thing out of that in order to to go live.
And you can just use Starbucks. Just go to a local Starbucks.
I know. Actually, I'm laughing, but I had a friend who did do that. He actually would do book reviews, and so he would go to his local Starbucks in Los Angeles and then say, "Hey, here's the book that I'm reading," and then he would talk about it. And
that's awesome.
I mean, it wasn't huge, but I think he's just a book nerd and he loves doing that. And I hope we see more of that type of creative content out there.
So for yourself, what are some apps and kind of life hacks that you are willing and able to share with our listeners and viewers today? Apps that you love, apps that you can't live without, and maybe just some life hacks that you found have been really helpful these days.
I mean, I think one of the ones that I find fascinating is, and I got into it years ago now, is Canva, which is an Australian app that allows anybody to design. So I'm a really big believer in people learning as much design as they can, even if they don't say they're a designer. So not everyone can, learn Illustrator or Photoshop. When I was in college, I happened to learn those things because I worked for the student newspaper. The student newspaper basically said, hey, we need someone to lay out the newspaper, and you need to know Illustrator, PageMaker, and Photoshop. And I was like, well, how am I going to learn those? And this woman who also laid out the paper said, well, I'll teach you if you give me like time to teach you how to do it, because that's just how you learned things. Nowadays, I would say, hey, go to YouTube and you can learn pretty much anything. But at that time, someone's like, hey, let's do this. But I think from that, now I basically have said to people, hey, there's no excuse anymore. There's this great app called Canva. You could basically design anything that you want to. And I think that has liberated some small businesses who have said, okay, I really had trouble with design. Now they can design those things. And then if you put that also with Squarespace, the ability to build a website or Wix. Those are things I can't really live without, because I think that helps with what we now get into, which is, okay, I want to be able to do e-commerce. Well, Shopify allows that. Anybody could have a Shopify. So you put all these elements together, Darian, and I just, none of these require being on a laptop anymore. I mean, you could do it on a laptop, but you could also do a lot of things on a mobile device. So I think those things have become, really important to me. I also just am a big fan of mental wellness. So I have been, overusing, I think, meditation apps are sort of like apps that basically might give you some confidence. And then, of course, even before all this happened, I really have always enjoyed fitness. And so I've always really been into boxing and have been into high intensity interval training. And so when this whole pandemic basically happened, it was like, okay, I'm going to hang my heavy bag, which was sitting in a corner for years, and just got back into using a lot of boxing fitness apps because those basically know that you can't go to a class and you can basically monitor your heart rate and what your sort of output is. I think, all that's important, commerce apps, wellness apps, fitness apps, nutrition apps, all those things I think are really, really fascinating.
That's awesome. Those that want to learn more about you or find your book or try out Microsoft advertising, where can they go from here?
Yeah, so if you want to check out Microsoft Advertising, microsoftadvertising.com. We have, you can, register for an account. If you're already using Google AdWords, we have simple import functions, so it doesn't require a lot of extra, work. If you want to actually spread your campaigns so you're reaching more people on different platforms, we've tried to provide a lot of those tools. You can follow on Twitter or Instagram at MSFT ads. So at MSFT advertising. So basically, if you want to follow us on those social channels. And then I'm pretty active on Twitter at DJGEOFFE. So if people want to follow me there, and also on LinkedIn, I'm pretty active as well. Post a lot about different things that businesses can do. And then I have my podcast, Disruptive FM. If people want to just listen to that,
Awesome.
I thank you in advance for anyone who does want to subscribe, rate, and review that. So yeah.
That's awesome. And your book, tell us about your book. Where can we find it?
Oh yeah, it came out in 2016. It's called Disruptive Marketing, and it's on HarperCollins Leadership. You can find it pretty much anywhere where books are sold. So there's some things in there that I think might be a little dated, but at the same time things recycle. So I talk a lot about media consumption and media habits, and that's just an area that I'm always fascinated in. I actually did a bunch of research recently for Microsoft Advertising in terms of how COVID-19 has reshaped our media consumption habits. So that's something I look at constantly in terms of how we consume media, how we use media, Darian. I think that is something that if you're in advertising or you're trying to market any type of business, you need to understand what that zeitgeist is, what the pulse is of humanity, because that ultimately resonates with people. The more your messaging, is tapped into where we, what we're feeling at a given moment.
It's awesome. Well, we'll make sure to put all the links in the show notes here. Those that want to find the link there on YouTube. I appreciate everyone for joining us this week on Marketing Jam. Thank you so much for joining us this week. So many great ideas, lots of things to think about. It's been a real pleasure to have you. And one day we have to do this interview in person. We also recently bought a fern. So we only have one fern. We don't have two ferns, but we thought we would add a fern to our interview to just kind of liven it up a bit. And so we might be looking at calling it Beside One Fern type of interview. But we'd love to host you here in British Columbia when the borders are open. So thanks again. And we'll see you everyone next week on Marketing Jam.